Imagine a blood-soaked scaffold, a woman in royal velvet screaming as the axe hacks again and again and again. This is not fairy tale monarchy. This is the truth they never taught you in school. This is the 5 most brutal deaths of royal women. There's a good chance you've heard about these royal women, but the history books didn't tell you how they were brutally murdered. Just wait till you hear about the last one and what happened to her dog. They said these queens and noblewomen were chosen by God, destined to rule. But behind the gilded portraits, torture chambers, execution grounds, and courts plotting murder with holy crosses held high, their deaths were not quick, not clean, not merciful. Blades missing necks, fires lit with prayers, silk cords tightening in silent bedrooms, heads spiked on walls to warn the next generation what happened to women who refused to kneel. And the best part? They called it justice. I'm not just telling you this for shock. I want you to see what they covered up. You weren't supposed to know this, but you're here now, and you can't unlearn it. Picture it. An elderly noblewoman with royal blood in her veins, hauled onto the scaffold before a hushed crowd. The axe waits. The king's justice hangs in the air like a blade itself. They called it an execution, but what really happened on that platform was something closer to slaughter, blood spraying everywhere. That was Margaret Pole, Countess of Salisbury. But they want you to think Henry VIII was just tidying up traitors. Let's see what really happened. Margaret was born in 1473, daughter of George, Duke of Clarence. That's the same Clarence famously drowned in a butt of Malmsey wine for treason. Royal scandal was practically family tradition. When the Tudors won the Wars of the Roses, they let her live. At first, married her to Sir Richard Pole, safe, controlled. But Henry VIII's paranoia changed everything. He broke with Rome, made himself head of the church, killed anyone who said otherwise. Margaret? Catholic to her bones. Her son Reginald Pole called Henry's new church heresy. Henry didn't like that, so he decided to erase the entire family. He arrested Margaret in 1538, hauled her to the Tower of London. Years in that cold stone prison, damp walls, straw beds crawling with lice. The charge? Treason. The evidence? Letters, rumors, her son's mouth. Historians still argue if she even knew about Reginald's plots. But Henry didn't care. He wanted her gone. In 1541, he signed her death warrant. They dragged her to the scaffold at Tower Green. But here's the part they don't want you to know. Margaret wasn't a trembling old lady. When the executioner told her to kneel, she refused. She wasn't going to make it easy. She ran around the scaffold, screaming, "I am no traitor," while guards chased her like an animal. Witnesses were horrified. One courtier called it a pitiful and strange sight. The executioner cornered her, raised his axe, missed her neck, hit her shoulder. Blood gushed. She shrieked. He swung again, missed again. He kept chopping while she screamed, 10 or 11 strikes, hacking through bone and flesh. The crowd? Nobles and ladies in velvet gagging at the sight of this grandmother butchered like livestock. They called it an accident, said the executioner was unpracticed. But come on, this was a message. Henry showing what happened to those who wouldn't bow. You won't see this scene in royal portraits. They like to paint Henry with a Bible in hand, defender of the faith, not an old woman crawling in blood, while her head barely stayed attached. They don't want you to know Margaret Pole was one of the last Plantagenets. Killing her was Henry killing the past, wiping out a rival claim. erasing the bloodline that could challenge him. And they really don't want you imagining the smell. Blood soaking the wood, flesh stuck to the blade, her screams bouncing off tower walls. That wasn't justice. That was terror. Because nothing says godly king like butchering a grandmother in daylight. Henry's chroniclers cleaned it up. Executed for treason. Full stop. No mention of the chase. No mention of the hacking. No mention of the blood. Because history isn't written by the victors. It's written by those who don't want to admit how much they enjoyed watching. But we're not done. Because the next woman on our list didn't even get the mercy of a blade. They burned her alive. Let's see how holy men made a human torch. Picture this. A 19-year-old girl, tied to a stake, fire curling up her skirt like grasping fingers, priests droning Latin she can't hear over the roar of a crowd thirsty for a witch burning, smoke in her throat before the flames even bite. She cries out for Christ as the wood crackles beneath her. That's how France thanked its so-called savior. But they'd rather you picture a saint in armor, a clean legend, not a teenage girl choking on cinders while a bishop took notes. Joan of Arc, born 1412, Domremy, a muddy village stinking of pig pens. She claimed to hear God. Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, Saint Margaret. Voices telling her to save France. France in the 1420s wasn't a country. It was a smashed mosaic of burnt farms, broken oaths, and unwashed mercenaries. She showed up in 1429, about 16, clad in ill-fitting armor, rode to Orleans, lifted the siege, turned disaster into a miracle, a propaganda dream. A girl who made soldiers believe God hadn't forsaken them. That terrified them, because she didn't know her place. She wore men's clothes, gave orders to knights, claimed heaven skipped the priests to talk to a farmer's daughter. She made them obsolete, so they sold her out. Captured at Compiègne in 1430, sold to the English for 10,000 livres, like livestock. They didn't want her dead in battle. They wanted a public lesson. Dragged in chains to Rouen, presided over by Bishop Pierre Cochon, a man so holy he'd burn a girl alive to prove it. They charged her with heresy, witchcraft, cross-dressing, because the worst sin wasn't hearing God. It was doing it without their permission. They threatened her with torture, forced an abjuration she likely couldn't read, then tore it up when they felt merciful that day was over. They recorded every word. She answered like a soldier, refusing to flinch even when they showed her the rack. By May 1431, the show was over. They condemned her. On May 30, they tied her to the stake in Rouen marketplace. She asked for a cross. A sympathetic priest held one up as the flames rose. Witnesses said she cried, "Jesus," until her voice cracked. Flesh split and blackened. Burning hair stank in the square. People gagged. One English soldier sobbed, convinced they'd damned themselves. But the priests kept chanting, because nothing says mercy like cremating a teenager alive while reciting psalms. When the flames died, they gathered the ashes, burned them again, dumped them in the Seine. No relics, no grave, just water swallowing the evidence. They didn't want a saint. They wanted a memory so erased it couldn't rise again. But the joke was on them. In 1456, they retried her, declared her innocent. Oops. Turns out killing a teenage girl for wearing pants wasn't holy. By 1920, they canonized her. By then, she was safe. Dead saints don't argue. They made statues, paintings, gave her a feast day, called her France's savior. but not when it would have saved her life. Because they'll always sanctify you once you're safely silent, but not while you're dangerous. Ready to keep digging? Because the next queen lost her head to a blade, and they promised her it would be quick. It wasn't. Picture a queen kneeling on cold straw, wind slashing across Tower Green. A French executioner watching her prayers with professional boredom. One swing of a sword turning royal vows into a blood-soaked warning label. Anne Boleyn, Henry VIII's second wife. The woman who lost her head so the king could try again. But let's drop the romance novel nonsense. They want you to remember a tragic love affair, not the rigged trial, not the political slaughter, not the woman waiting to die while London gossiped about her clothes. Anne was born around 1501, daughter of Thomas Boleyn, an ambitious schemer who treated royal favor like a stock market. She grew up in Europe, France, the Low Countries, learning to flirt in 4 languages. A perfect diplomatic weapon. Henry noticed her around 1525, but Anne didn't tumble into his bed. She made him wait. 7 years. Long enough for him to lose his mind and tear England from the Pope's grip. No Rome. No annulment. No problem. He just built his own church. His own rules. They married in 1533. She gave birth to Elizabeth. A girl. Not the heir he wanted. And everything curdled. By 1536, Anne had miscarried a son. Henry was eyeing Jane Seymour like a replacement part. Anne wasn't an ex-wife in waiting. She was an obstacle. And in Tudor England, obstacles got headless real fast. Thomas Cromwell, Henry's fixer, built the charges. Adultery, incest, treason. Even her own brother George was accused. A legal fever dream so shoddy, even her enemies snickered at it. But Henry didn't care. Truth was optional. He needed her erased. She was arrested May 2, 1536. Dragged to the Tower. Tried May 15 in the King's Hall. Anne in black velvet. A jury hand-picked to nod along. She defended herself brilliantly. Didn't matter. They found her guilty. Sentenced to burn or behead. Henry picked the merciful option. A sword. French. Imported cruelty. May 19. Anne woke before dawn. Prayed. Refused food. Led to the scaffold. Records say she gave a short speech praising Henry. Imagine knowing you had to flatter the man ordering your death. She knelt, blindfolded. Her ladies wept so hard they almost collapsed. The executioner was so smooth. He hid the sword behind his back, said, "Madam, where is my sword?" to distract her. Then swung, clean, precise. Her head dropped onto straw. Blood pooled. Her eyes may have flickered. Some said her mouth moved in silent prayer. Gentle? Don't fall for that. It was state-sanctioned murder with imported style. Henry married Jane Seymour 10 days later. Nothing screams grief like a honeymoon before the blood dries. But they called it God's will. As if love ever stopped a king from ordering your head on a block. Anne wasn't just executed. She was meant to be erased. Her name blackened. Her body dumped in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, at first unmarked, like a warning to anyone who forgot their place. But here's the delicious irony they skip in the schoolbooks. Her daughter Elizabeth would rule for 45 years. The Virgin Queen. Anne's bloodline saved the dynasty Henry broke a church to create. Poetic revenge from beyond the grave. Strange how they never dwell on that part, huh? But don't go anywhere. Because next is a queen who died brutally gasping for air. Stick around. And if you want to keep unwrapping royal horror with me, go ahead and subscribe. We're only getting started. Picture this. A queen dragged into a dark room, knees scraping stone, hands bound, a silken cord tightening around her neck until her eyes bulged and her legs kicked. They called it mercy, because silk doesn't splash like an axe. Welcome to Joanna of Naples. Born 1326, daughter of Charles, Duke of Calabria. He died while she was still a toddler, so they made her heir to Naples before she was 5. Nothing says stable monarchy like giving a kingdom to someone who couldn't even read. They married her off young. In 1343, she wed Andrew of Hungary. Her cousin, of course, because if you can't keep it in the family, what's the point? Andrew was ambitious, awkward, and wanted to be co-ruler. Naples wasn't having it. Neither was Joanna, so they solved it the royal way. Murder. In 1345, Andrew was yanked from bed at Aversa, screaming, begging. Some say he was thrown from a balcony with a rope. Others say strangled slowly while pleading to see Joanna one last time. He didn't get back up. And the blame? Squarely on Joanna. Did she order it? Historians still argue. But let's just say she didn't send flowers. Andrew's brother, Louis I of Hungary, didn't send thank you notes. He invaded Naples in 1347. Armies flooding the kingdom. Nobles scrambling. Joanna fleeing to Provence. But you can't outrun papal wrath. The Pope got involved, because the medieval church loved meddling as much as it loved gold. In 1350, they hauled Joanna to Avignon, accused her of regicide, excommunicated her, stripped her crown. What did she do? Begged forgiveness, bribed the right cardinals, got absolved, marched back to Naples like nothing happened, because nothing says holy repentance like paying off the Vatican's renovation fund. She ruled for decades after, but her reputation rotted. Poisoner, murderess, adulteress. The whispers never stopped. By the 1370s, her kingdom was fracturing. Civil war. Nephews and cousins fighting over the throne like drunks brawling over a bar stool. She adopted Louis of Anjou as heir. Big mistake. Charles of Durazzo, her other relative, didn't appreciate being cut out. He invaded Naples in 1381, captured Joanna, locked her in the castle of Muro, and then it went quiet. No grand trial, no papal forgiveness, just a dark cell. One day, in 1382, men walked in, closed the door, wrapped a silken cord around her throat. They called it noble, because they didn't use a dagger. But she died clawing at their arms, choking on her own screams, eyes bulging, froth at her lips. A queen murdered like a dog in the dark. Chroniclers wrote carefully, dispatched quietly, ended with dignity, because telling the truth meant admitting the hypocrisy. Europe's divine monarchs strangling each other with silk, while priests blessed the killers. They don't want you to know that. They want you to see crowns and tapestries, not bruises on royal throats, not the blood money changing hands in papal courts. But you're here now. You know the secret. And there's more where this came from. Because next we have a queen whose execution was so messy, it even terrified the audience. Imagine it. A queen forced to kneel on a stained block. The air tense, the crowd silent, waiting for the axe to fall. And the first swing misses. Striking bone. Not enough to kill. The crowd recoils. What they didn't tell you is how badly it went. How a royal execution turned into a butcher's nightmare. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was Tudor justice at its most gruesome. Welcome to the final act of Mary, Queen of Scots. She was born in 1542, crowned 6 days later. Because in Scotland, being born with the right blood meant a crown and a target. Raised in France, married the Dauphin in 1558, Queen of France at 16, widow at 18. Life didn't slow down. She returned to Scotland in 1561. Protestant nobles despised her Catholic faith. Foreign powers circled like wolves. Her cousin Elizabeth I watched every move. And then marriage. Always the fatal mistake for royal women. She married Lord Darnley in 1565. Handsome, charming, also violent and scheming. He helped murder her secretary David Rizzio, stabbed him in front of her while she was pregnant. Blood on the floor, on her dress. Months later, Darnley died. Explosion. His strangled corpse in the garden. Coincidence? Sure, if you trust medieval CSI. Everyone suspected Mary, especially when she married the prime suspect, the Earl of Bothwell, a man who allegedly abducted her and forced the marriage. Her enemies revolted, captured her, forced her to abdicate in 1567 in favor of her 1-year-old son, James, because putting a baby on the throne was better than a queen with a spine. She escaped in 1568, fled to England, to Elizabeth, and Elizabeth welcomed her like family by locking her up for 19 years because Mary was dangerous. She had a claim to the English throne. Catholics wanted her crowned. Elizabeth wanted her silent. So they played the long game. Castles, manors, rooms stinking of damp plaster and dying fires, letters, plots, or so they said. In 1586, they caught her in the Babington plot. Letters supposedly showing she approved of Elizabeth's assassination. Historians still debate if they were forged or edited, but the verdict was set before the ink dried. Death, February 8, 1587. Fotheringhay Castle. She wore black. Underneath, crimson. Deliberate. A final insult to her accusers. The executioner asked forgiveness. She gave it. Laid her neck on the block. And then, it all went wrong. First blow hit the back of her head. She gasped. Blood. Sprayed. The crowd horrified. Second blow still didn't finish it. Sickening thud. Her body shuddering. Only on the third try did the head come free. Even then, when they held it up, the auburn hair came away in the executioner's hand. It was a wig. Her grey hair tumbled down. An old woman stripped of dignity, even in death. And then the dog, her little Skye Terrier, hidden in her skirts, refusing to leave even as her blood soaked its fur, whining in terror, licking blood from the floor. Try cleaning that up for the chronicles. They did. Called it justice. Holy duty. Elizabeth even claimed she hadn't meant to sign the warrant. Sure, like a drunk swearing they didn't mean the last drink. They wanted Mary gone. Her bloodline too dangerous. But irony got the last laugh. Her son, James VI of Scotland, would become James I of England, uniting the crowns Elizabeth thought she was protecting. They want you to see grand portraits, not the blood-soaked dog, not the truth about royal justice. But now you know. You're in on the secret. History doesn't forget. It just waits for someone to dig it up. So what did we learn? Royalty was supposed to be elegant, divine, chosen by God himself. But if you scrape away the gold leaf, you see it for what it was. A slaughterhouse in velvet. Margaret Pole screaming as the axe hacked her like butcher's meat. Joan of Arc burning alive while priests called it holy. Anne Boleyn blinking at the crowd as a Frenchman swung the blade. Joanna of Naples strangled with silken rope, just enough civility to call it royal. Mary, Queen of Scots, losing her head in 3 gruesome strokes while her dog licked her blood. And the worst part? This wasn't even shocking for the time. It was normal and expected. A system that sold the lie of noble blood while spilling it on the ground. They wrote ballads about grace and piety while digging mass graves. But they don't want you to see that. They want you to forget. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. You're in on it now. Subscribe if you want to keep digging up the secrets they buried. Because this isn't the last dark secret we're going to drag screaming into the light. And if you want to see just how far they took this madness, click the video to see what happened when 19,000 died as the Crusader Knights tried to capture Jerusalem, all in the name of God.